Hello, this is IP Stories by 4IP Council, a podcast about innovation and intellectual property. Join us and you'll hear about the journeys through invention, creation, and IP understanding of our guests. I'm Fernanda.
And I'm Marta, and today we are happy to welcome to our podcast Harrie Temmink, who is Head of Service at the European Union Intellectual Property Office, or the EUIPO. Hi, Harrie.
Hello, happy to be here.
Happy to have you. So, in your early career, you gave lectures in public economic law and still do occasional lectures in European Union law. You have also built a successful career in the European institutions. Could you please tell us what led you to where you are today?
Yes, thank you very much for having me. Well, I studied Spanish language and literature apart from law at the University of Utrecht. And I started to teach at the EUIPO Institute of that university after my studies. I was specialized in internal market law, EU law. And then I went to the Court of Justice of the EU in Luxembourg as a legal secretary, a referent there for the Dutch Advocate General at the time. And then in the period 2003-2023, that's more than 20 years, I was an official of the European Commission. And in that period, I spent 11 years in total on industrial property. My very first job in 2003 actually was to negotiate the IP Enforcement Directive, well known by many listeners, I guess. But I was also dealing with many other files, including the preparations for what is now the Unitary Patent Court, lots of issues related to trademarks, to designs, to geographical indications, and international affairs like EUIPO, and of course also files related to the EUIPO, which at the time was called OHIM. So basically I did everything in the area of industrial property that a commission official can be dealing with. Mm-hmm. And the other 9 years of these 20 years I spent on a mixture of digital and green files, including responsibilities for online services and then in particular the e-commerce directive. So the combination of that all actually brought me here last year to Alicante, to the EUIPO as indeed the head of service IP in the digital world, which includes intermediaries, copyright, legal affairs, and international affairs.
So, Harrie, could you tell us a little bit about why do you think anti-privacy and anti-counterfeiting are important?
Well, that's a very important question. And it is not unusual to hear from friends or family, especially when you're at parties or birthdays, and when you work on intellectual property, people saying to you, well, what does it matter? Buying a fake Louis Vuitton bag, a fake football shirt, watching illegally a blockbuster movie, illegally download some music online. What's the problem with that? That's not really stealing. Big multinationals earn a lot of money with it. And right owners, they don't normally even notice it. So that is, of course, the very wrong approach. First of all, because it is stealing. Article 70, second paragraph of the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights protects the right of property, including the intangible assets, such as intellectual property. And it's all recognized in the Court of Justice case law as well. So IP infringements or counterfeiting and piracy are illegal activities, and we should not tolerate that because it violates the rule of law and it undermines our democracies. Mm-hmm. Now, that is, of course, very much a legal argument, and you can say, well, what the heck with legal arguments? But I should also refer to the many studies done by the EUIPO, the OECD, national IP offices, NGOs, business associations, and all these studies confirm that counterfeiting and piracy harm social and economic interests of society. Mm-hmm. So first of all, they lead to unfair competition. They have a major impact on growth and jobs in the EU. And there is a very famous figure from 2019, one of the EUIPO studies, together with the OECD. It says that the imports of counterfeits and pirated goods in the EU accounts for 119 billion euros. And that's almost 6% of all the imports that we have in the EU. And that's quite an impressive figure. And when that comes to counterfeiting, well, it leads to misleading of consumers. If you buy a fake Apple phone, you may not be aware. And did you know that in 2023, around 40% of all Europeans have wondered whether something they have bought would be a real product or a fake? So we have many Europeans who, when buying something online, they don't even know whether it's fake or real. It's quite problematic, I would say. Even more problematic it is probably when we look at the fact that counterfeiting can seriously affect the health of citizens. Think about the fake toys, the fake cosmetics, the falsified medicines, of course. I mean, it is a fact that counterfeited products do not meet the product and the environmental standards in the EU. The many directives and regulations that we're having on product safety, on chemical substances, and all the rest of it. And when we then move to the piracy part, well, we should not forget that copyright is the cornerstone of the EU cultural and creative sectors. They contribute to 7% of EU GDP, and there are almost 17 million people employed in these sectors. And it is because of copyright, because copyright ensures that creators receive recognition, but also money, remuneration for their works. Yeah. And without copyright, there will be no movies, there will be no live events, there will be no books being published, there will be no innovative software, there will be nothing. Because you need the investment and the efforts of artists, of writers, of publishers, producers, and the like. And with piracy, we should also not forget that downloading pirated content is a risk, because you have a chance that you are downloading malware, that you are downloading scams or any other harmful practices, for instance, for minors. And if this is not enough, then perhaps we should have a look as well at the commercial scale IP infringers themselves, the criminals. They don't pay taxes, or very seldom do they pay taxes. They are related to money laundering. They are related to corruption. They are infiltrating every step of the legal supply chain. And last but not least, there's a human cost involved, because very often production of counterfeits happens without respect for labor law. We have examples of forced labor, child labor in third countries in particular, but even within the borders of the EU.
Thank you very much, Harrie. I think that was a great summary of what people should think about before, downloading an illegal movie, or maybe a song, or buying counterfeit products. Do you think society understands better than 20 years ago the need to fight against counterfeiting and piracy? Do you think we should create more awareness? And if yes, how?
Well, if we look at the first part of the questions, the situation 20 years ago compared with the situation today, is it worse or better? I think it is very difficult to answer that with yes or no, or more or less. But let's develop that a little bit further. If you look at the facts, only the facts, well, there is a consistently high level of counterfeiting and piracy to start with. And the EUIPO is monitoring the trends. We have cyclic studies, and I'm afraid counterfeiting and piracy is there. We have to live with it. I don't think we will ever be able to eradicate IP infringements entirely. It's a fact of life. Now, if the situation is then better or worse than 20 years ago, I would say it is different. When I was young, you would go to a flea market and you would buy you would buy cassettes, you would buy tapes with absolutely no respect for copyright. Of course, I didn't do that, but I went to the flea market and I saw others doing that. Whereas nowadays, well, downloading illegal music is one click away on your mobile phone. Or to purchase a counterfeit product online, it's one click away, and you buy it on your e-commerce platform, right? So the digital transformation is a very good thing, as we all will probably recognize, but it also gives new opportunities for criminals to disseminate their illegal content. So there are new challenges in that respect as well. And if we then look at the question on awareness, should we create more awareness? Oh yes, you can never do enough awareness, of course. So let me just recall a few of the data that we have from our EUIPO perception study of 2023. Now, listen to this, counterfeiting. 80% of the Europeans agree that counterfeiting supports criminal organizations, it ruins businesses, it's bad for jobs. So that's 80%. So 20% doesn't even see a problem.
Okay.
And 2 out of 3 Europeans see counterfeiting as a threat to health, to safety, to the environment. So 2 out of 3. Is that good? Is that bad? Well, I still find that very alarming. But then, a third of the Europeans finds it acceptable to buy counterfeits if the price of a genuine product is too high. So 1 out of 3 Europeans say, well, there's nothing wrong with buying counterfeits because these Louis Vuitton bags, they are far too expensive. But this figure raises to 50% among young people. So that's the age group of 15 to 24. So half of the young people say, well, there's nothing wrong with counterfeits because, the genuine products are far too expensive. So we have created a culture where buying counterfeits is basically mainstream, I would say, right? And similar figures we have for piracy. So yes, 80% of the people say that they prefer to use legal sources when they access online content, if there is, of course, an affordable option available. But a large majority of the Europeans, and that is around 65%, considers it acceptable to pirate when content is not available on their subscription. That's fair enough. 65% says if I can't find it legally, I just go illegal, right? And here again, the youngsters are the most alarming group. Like 40% of Europeans admit that they have intentionally downloaded illegal sources in the last 12 months. So that's 40%. But that number raises to 33% of youngsters in the age between 15 and 24. So 1 out of 3 youngsters in Europe says, yes, I do actually download illegal content online. So with these figures, I don't think it's difficult to conclude that there is a big challenge ahead of us, not only when it comes to guaranteeing actually that there is sufficient legal offer online, which is a responsibility of businesses as well, but also to do more on awareness. And there, I think we as EUIPO, we are already doing quite a lot on awareness, which we should distinguish between the awareness about the value of IP. IP is important for you. And it's not only based on, it's not good to buy counterfeits or online or to download illegally. That's only one part of the awareness campaigns that we are running. The other part is IP is good for you. It's a much more positive story, actually, which is much better to sell. And we have several projects. The Ideas Powered projects, which specifies in projects for youngsters, because if you have to start somewhere, start with youngsters, because they are the basis of the future. And they are the most alarming category, as we heard earlier. So we have initiatives like IP for Youth, IP in Education, or efforts to promote IP in the curricula of the member states. And in that context, we are very pleased that the European Commission very recently, in the Commission recommendation to combat counterfeiting, which was published on the 19th of March of this year, puts so much emphasis on the promotion of awareness, including on the value of IP at all educational levels. So not only for youngsters, but also later on in the studies when people are actually preparing themselves for a certain job. Of course, we do a lot already. We can always do more, and we should not only do it ourselves. More awareness raising is needed, together with IP offices, with ministries of culture, with the private sector as well. And actually, as my final comment, I think you should target the audiences where in their own comfort zone. And we have a very interesting project running now And that is that we work together with professional influencers to make their followers aware about the value of IP. So that is a very clever move, I think. We should not, as an IP office, go out and say you should respect IP because well, who are we? We are professionals. We earn our money with promoting IP. No, it's much better to have the influencers, the professional influencers, convincing the followers actually that IP is a good thing and IP should be valued.
Thank you, Harrie. The stats you just gave us are really alarming, but it's also great that there are so many projects and initiatives from the EUIPO to make sure that we shift things around and that we create more awareness. And I'm a big fan of the Ideas Powered project. As you know, at For IP Council, we are members of that network, and I think it's great, all the work that it's been put into place. So my next question is, what is, from your experience, the most common threats that European inventors are facing from an IP rights perspective?
Okay, well, there are, of course, many threats. Life is full of threats, I would say. And I think that some of these threats we mentioned already earlier, and there is, in general, a lack of knowledge on the value of IP. And also when companies have registered already IP, there is a lack of knowledge on how to manage them very often, how to manage their rights, and how to avoid actually that their rights are infringed. And if they are infringed, then there is a lack of awareness about how to deal with it, both in the EU and elsewhere. But I would like to mention two specific issues which are related to IP enforcement and which focus on European inventors. Now, the first question, well known, I think, is the issue of expensive and lengthy litigation. That's a fact. If you have an issue, you have to go to court. It takes a long time and it will cost you a lot of money. And I'm afraid that it is very difficult to address that at EU level because it very much depends on the national cultures, the legal cultures that we have in place. And by the way, that's not unique in the EU, that you see everywhere in the world. But of course, we do our best to help IP right holders to defend their rights. And so what we have done in the EU, we have harmonized the civil and administrative procedures through, in particular, the IP Enforcement Directive. And more recently, we are working on facilitating the seizure of evidence digitally in cross-border situations. And we will promote very much the use of ADR, the use of mediation. As you may be aware, the EUIPO created a mediation center. But you will always depend on the willingness of all parties then to accept the outcome. So there is no golden bullet here that would solve all the issues for those who have a problem with IP infringement. But we do our best. Now, the second common threat for inventors that I want to mention is the protection of their trade secrets. So we have, since 2016, the Trade Secrets Directive, which is now basically transposed in all the member states, at least formally. We have a harmonized set of redress mechanisms in situations of misappropriation of trade secrets, when a trade secret is unlawfully acquired, used, or disclosed. And I think the biggest threats are coming from our digital society, because we have growing numbers of companies using cloud services. We are increasingly working remotely, and that increases the threats of cyber attacks to steal trade secrets from our businesses. It's an increasing problem. The problem of this problem is you don't hear much about it. For whatever reason, there is a sort of an embarrassment amongst businesses to make it known to the outside world that they have been the victim of cyber attacks in general, I think, and certainly when trade secrets have been stolen, you hardly hear about it. And Actually, it is no secret that most of the threats are coming from one particular country in Asia. It's called China. Spying and hacking is happening in China on an industrial basis. It is a deliberate uh, policy of China to steal trade secrets from elsewhere. And I should immediately say it's not a unique Chinese phenomenon. Also, in the rest of the world, including within the EU, we have examples of companies that are spying on other companies purely for getting commercial information, IP related information, so to say, trade secrets in order to do better themselves to the detriment of their competitor from, let's say, elsewhere in the EU. So it is not exclusively China, but China is a front runner, I would say. So what is needed actually to attack that? Huh? What do we need actually to combat cyber attacks and stealing of trade secrets? Well, there are two main levels, I think. The first level is the political level. We should put pressure on these countries that allow hackers to develop. And we see that happening in the G7 statements. We also see that this is one of the rare examples in the US where all parties agree on their approach. That we need to do more actually to avoid cyber attacks coming from China. And in the EU, we are also doing our best at EU level. The EEAS is working on this, but unfortunately in the EU it's very difficult to have one voice because cybersecurity is related to security, and security is very much perceived still as a national competence. So discussions at EU level are always difficult to develop because of the fact that member states may not necessarily show everything that they know or contribute with everything that they can. So this is an issue actually, that at political level it is difficult to fight cyber attacks and stealing of trade secrets. So this is a political level. But then what businesses can do, of course, is something at micro level. And that is to create a very good, sound digital infrastructure, have preventive measures in place to avoid hacking taking place. And because this is not different from protecting your house with locks, with alarms to avoid that burglars are actually robbing your place. I mean, this is not different in an online environment. And here, maybe it's a good moment to allow me to make some promotion for a new tool that the European Commission has been launched recently in April of this year. It's a new awareness tool. They call it a toolkit with materials for SMEs in particular to take measures to avoid cyber theft of trade secrets. Yeah. Now, why SMEs? Well, that is because of research that, we in the EU, we have done, and we see that SMEs are much more vulnerable for cybersecurity thefts. Of course, they have limited resources. They lack specified personnel. They don't have budgets. And generally, I would say there is a lack of awareness that you can be the victim of a cyber attack. And when you are aware of it, it's probably already too late.
Yeah, I think we will have to include loads of links at the end of this podcast. And as soon as the toolkit is ready, we will definitely include it as well so that our listeners can find it.
Thank you.
So interesting, so many things that you have mentioned. I was also about to stop you for a couple of times because I really didn't know that companies wouldn't talk publicly about being hacked or having their cybersecurity in danger.
How do you think that will look like for the shareholders of the company when they know that their company has been hacked? But there are, of course, very clear economic reasons, commercial reasons behind the lack that it's not only that they don't say it publicly, they're also very hesitant to share this information with the law enforcement authority.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, as soon as you mention it, I was like, it makes sense that it happens, but of course it's such a big issue. I have loads of questions. So there is something that you mentioned as well, that rings a bell, because this is something that we also hear a lot at 4IP Council. So we know that SMEs that benefit from the SME fund are really happy with it, and they apply for their IP rights. But depending on the IP right, they feel that they might be powerless to defend themselves against infringers. So you have already mentioned a few things that they could do, but I think it would be nice to make it clear what steps they can take to address this issue if they have to face it, and provide better support.
Okay, well, first of all, we are very pleased to hear this good feedback about the EUIPO SME voucher system that was introduced in 2021 in plain COVID. I know because I was involved from the Commission side at the time. Together with the European Commission and also the national IP offices, this voucher system has been developed to give a boost to small companies, startups to protect their IP rights, and that is in particular through trademark and designs registrations, but now we also have patents, we have plant variety rights. Perhaps interesting to know that since the system was launched in 2021, and the launch has been done through a fees reduction, you get a reimbursement of part of the fees. We have seen more than 50,000 SMEs across the EU to register their IP assets with the support of the voucher system. That's more than 50,000. That's not
That's incredible.
A minor percentage. Yeah. So this is important. Well, why? We know why, because according to our most recent SME scoreboard, only 10% of SMEs in the EU protect their assets through IP rights. Only 10%. And that's a bit of a shame, because we know from studies that those who protect IP rights do much better in the economy. They earn 68% more per employee. It's less likely that they go bankrupt. It's much easier for IP right owners, SMEs, startups, IP right owners to get funding. So there are many reasons actually to cherish your assets with IP rights. Now, when it comes to defending these SMEs, the 10% I would say, but possibly more, because we do not have, of course, trade secrets that we register, or unregistered designs or copyright. So it's more than the 10% probably. So when it comes to defend SMEs against IP infringers, well, what steps to take? Well, perhaps we can start with a kind of a traditional step, which is called the IP scan, that is known in many member states and also at EU level, which is the basis of many companies' IP strategy. So what is a nice IP scan? What does it mean? Well, you work together with an IP expert. You are going to review your business model with that expert. You are looking what are your valuable IP assets, what are assets that can be protected with IP rights. Then, of course, you get advice on how to register them, but also how to manage them. And, of course, this is then the important part, you also identify ways to protect them and what to do if someone is infringing your rights. So you warn the SMEs already in advance. If something happens, then this is the protocol that you should follow. And well, that is in general what we do with IP scans for SMEs. Now, the novelty here is that we combine the voucher system with the IP scans with a new project that is called the IP enforcement scan, or the IP scan enforcement. And the objective is there to help SMEs, to provide SMEs with a service to protect their rights directly. So for whom is that meant to be? Well, it's meant to be for those who have, so those SMEs who have recently been confronted with cease and desist letter, for instance, because it can be that SMEs are also the victim of, well, that they have themselves actually infringed IP rights, which is not unusual, let's face it, intentionally or not intentionally, we hope unintentionally. So it is a financial tool, on the one hand, for those who have been attacked by a third party, But of course, it's also meant, and mainly meant, I would say, when companies become aware of IP infringements, and then they need support, financial support, IP scan support to take action.
Those are great initiatives. Thank you for highlighting them, putting this all together for our listeners. As I mentioned before, industries are
Dear
changing.
listeners, today's episode is going to finish here. I know it's a bit abrupt and unexpected, but the conversation with Harrie Temmink was very interesting, and we decided to go on for a little bit longer than usual. The second part will be published in September, and there he will talk about the opportunities and challenges of AI in regards to IP rights. If you don't want to miss it, make sure you subscribe to our podcast in your favorite channel and you follow us on social media. Thank you. Bye bye. Thank you for listening to IP Stories by 4IP Council. Visit our website on 4ipcouncil.eu to find out more and check out the links mentioned during this episode. If you liked it, remember to share and subscribe.